Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek, back with the Greenskin Q&A series. So without any further ado, let's hop right into the first question. We've got Hungrymimic asking, that gives me Dark Souls flashbacks. Hey there Sotek, here's my question for your Greenskins Q&A. In the Total Warhammer Games, we see that Goblin or Orc Shamans have the ability to use magic in their own lores, Little Waagh and the Big Waagh, but there are ways for Greenskin Shamans to use other are there ways for Greenskin Shamans to use other more often used lores like Lore of Life or Lore of Death? And he talks about Azhag a little bit. Have there ever been any cases when a shaman was able to cast spells that were not directed by Gork or Mark, or are Greenskins just limited to cast them? So, Greenskins cannot cast outside of their designated lore. So, Orcs can only cast from Lore of the Big Waagh, and Goblins can only cast from Lore of the Little Waagh. Azhag was the one exception to that rule, because Azhag, the Crown of Sorcery, literally allowed Nagash, or Nagash's essence, who's the Great Necromancer, to take over Azhag's body and mind temporarily, and it would cast death magic through him. It would kind of use him as a conduit. So, Azhag, for instance, cannot cast magic normally. Azhag is not a shaman. He is a orc war boss who essentially, through the crown, got the ability to unleash death magic. But he cannot cast normal greenskin magic when the crown is not in control, for instance. But outside of him, there has never been a greenskin who has cast the other lords of magic. And it's just because they don't... Greenskins do not study magic. They don't learn the secrets of it, the arcane language. They don't go through all of the training that the other races who can cast the generic lores can, or what we call the battle lores. So the battle lores are the 8 big ones. Greenskins literally just have this innate, the ones that end up being shamans have this very innate connection to the winds of magic, and they literally just throw their hands forward and go into a trance and just start unleashing stuff. A lot of the time, some of the more powerful shamans can actively know what they're doing, but a fair amount of the time they just get juiced up on waaagh energy and just go nuts with different gestures, and will cast a spell that's why their spells are so bizarre and kind of chaotic, is that Greenskins don't really know what they're doing. They just kind of go and stuff happens. So, but could they learn to cast other lores? Probably. If you had a Greenskin wizard and you actually had the ability to get him to not try to kill you every 5 seconds, and you could teach him over a long period of time, it's more than likely you could teach them how to control other winds of magic. But that's never happened because, Greenskins don't play nice with others. Frost, very similar question. We already just answered that. TraditionalButt asks, alright for, oh, nope, we already answered that too. Just wanted, well, he does ask, do Greenskins actually farm? Some do, yes. Like Night Goblins and some groups of orcs. Generally, when the Greenskins settle in a fortress or something, they will have a farming system. Night Goblins are the best at it by far, but forest goblins tend to specialize in almost ranching type scenarios where they raise spiders. Night Goblins are very, very big on mushroom farms and squig farms. Cat59 asks, how powerful are Gork and Mark compared to the other races' gods? What about the Feaster from Beyond? Speaking of which, what is the Feaster from Beyond, and does it have a physical avatar like some other gods do? So, okay, for the first part, Gork and Mark are definitely capable of going toe-to-toe with the strongest of the other gods. Whether it's the Elven Pantheon, the Old Ones, the Chaos Gods, the Gods of Men, yada yada. But the problem is, Gork and Mark are way too busy constantly beating the crap out of each other. That's their whole dynamic, is that they are always fighting one another, for eternity. One of the big things about going into Ragnarok, or the end of days in the Greenskins win, would be getting the two of them to stop fighting each other and focus on organizing against a single opponent. But they're definitely strong enough to go on par with all of the other major powers. As for the Feaster from Beyond, who is more commonly known as the Spider God, he is a pretty big enigma. It's extremely... He's a very... It is a very alien and bizarre god that is likely hiding somewhere in the realm of chaos in its own little pocket dimension. But the Spider God more than likely came into existence much like the Great Horned Rat did, where it kind of existed due to the consciousness is the minds, we'll say that, of all of the spiders across the entire world. Like, even those spiders were not capable of manifesting a deity with their own thoughts, because they're really, primal, or they're very, basic creatures. It seems like there is enough spiders in existence that the Feaster from Beyond was able to very vaguely manifest, which is why it's so alien and strange. But when the forest goblins were able to make contact with it and started worshiping it, the Feaster from Beyond went from being kind of like a minor influence to being like an actual minor god who is worshipped on par with Gork and Mark in forest goblin society. So when the forest goblins started worshiping it, especially because Greenskins worship is very fanatical and has a lot of power, the spider god became capable of actually manifesting its power in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, which is where some of the spells from the Little Waaagh comes from, is that they're traditionally forest goblin spells. But that being said, as for an avatar, technically all spiders are believed or considered to be children of the spider god by the forest goblins. That's likely not the case, but as for all the evidence we've seen, there has never been a physical avatar of the spider god in the physical world, because he doesn't have that much power, thankfully, because it would probably be nightmarish. But it's kind of like with Sotek. Even though Sotek did build up enough power to manifest, the thing with the Feaster from Beyond is that the forest goblins are his only worshippers, and they've never really been able to get like enough of a waaagh going to allow it to manifest. But they basically treat the largest of Arachnaroks as its physical avatars, and the largest of Arachnaroks are totally okay with this system. And when they go to war, the biggest Arachnaroks are terrifying. Like, they make normal Arachnaroks look like a joke. But thankfully, the only ones you'll find that are that big are in the Black Pit or in Mount Arachnos. We have another question from Kat, which is very, very similar, which is, which I'm going to break it down to basically asking, why are goblins the only type of greenskin to worship the Feaster from Beyond? Could other greenskins have a cult to it? And have there been any other races that have tried to worship it? So no other races worship the spider god. It's mostly due to most people's reactions when dealing with giant spiders is to run away or try and kill it with fire as quickly as possible. But forest goblins tend to be apparently a little more accepting of dangerous monsters that they can befriend. As for the only reason that forest goblins worship it and no one else does is because the forest goblins are the only race who have figured out how to make contact with the Feaster from Beyond. Because you need I think it's called a purple venom back, but you need a really special kind of small spider that has a really potent venom, and it basically works as a hallucinogen that you allow it to, I don't remember if it's that they eat it or they allow it to bite their tongue or something, but it causes their tongues to swell up really big and purple, and they start doing this really bizarre dance that allows them to basically talk to it. So it's not so much of an issue of that the spider god is like this really influential creature and only the goblins have given into it. It's more of it's so alien and foreign and bizarre that nobody else even knows it exists except for the forest goblins. All the other greenskins just assume it's either not real or they think it's just like an aspect of Gork and Mark when really it's its own separate entity. But all the other parts of your question we've already answered, so let's move on. This one is from Two Trains, who asks, has there ever been a greenskin that is worshipped / believed in the Chaos Gods? not in Warhammer Fantasy modern lore. If you go way back to some super duper old fantasy lore, I think there were Chaos Orcs, but they got retconned out of existence. And in 40k, things might be different. But in fantasy, no. There's no Chaos worshipping Orcs or Greenskins. Varbles asks, what explains the difference between Orcs and Goblins? So, oh man, a lot. They're two sides of a coin. Where orcs are traditionally the cunningly brutal aspect of Greenskin culture, which is typically represented by Gork, if you know like the super nitty grittiness. And then goblins tend to be the brutally cunning aspect of Greenskin culture, which is typically represented by Mork, though they are technically interchangeable, being twin deities. But they're different in pretty much every feasible way. The only thing that Orcs and Goblins have in common is that they are both Greenskins and that they are both really entertained by violence. But Orcs are like these huge hulking brutes. They're very ape-like in that they have like really big arms and shoulders. They have big tusks and really prominent jaws, and typically have really large foreheads. You know, and they have their lower bodies are smaller than their upper bodies, traditionally. Orcs are very big on being very loud with a very belligerent type of violence, where orcs tend to be much more into like a fair fight or just brutally fighting something that's really strong. You know, typically the harder something fights back, the more the orcs enjoy it. Orcs are also much bigger into wearing like tons of armor, and their primary desire and focus is on close combat, and they also have a much more limited relationship with other like creatures, because orcs very rarely feel they need to acquire anything to add on to their own strength. You know, they can handle it themselves. So the only thing they ever work with are boars and wyverns have to be provided to them by goblins, whereas boars are the only thing the Greenskins have that kind of, or orcs have that kind of relationship with. And then orcs, the three main subdivisions of orcs are black orcs, which are of course the Chaos Dwarf designed species. Then you have regular orcs, and then you have savage orcs, which savage orcs are of course orcs that are just very different culturally, because they don't use advanced weapons, or they don't use anything forged. Everything they used is always scavenged, or it's like bone weapons that they carve, or wood weapons that they shave down to sharp points. And those are like the three main subdivisions of orcs. And then for goblins, you have three main subdivisions of night goblins, common or plains goblins, and then forest goblins. And forest goblins are very similar to savage orcs, where they are much more about religion and having a like culture designed around very I don't want to say rural, but very non-sophisticated technology. You know, all their weapons they usually harvest from the spiders and the trees they live in. So they have like a lot of war paint or feathers from certain kinds of birds, and they use like a lot of their weapons will be, you know, they'll have shields made from the hide of dead spiders, or like their chitin or their molts, and they have like spears that'll be wood with maybe like a spider fang on the end of it and stuff like that, or you know, a really sharp rock. And then you have common goblins, who tend to be much more plains focused. You know, they're out in the sun, they tend to be a little taller. They're all about they have a really big relationship with wolves to cover a lot of far distance really fast, and they also specialize in artillery. You know, they're the ones that designed the rock labas and the doomdiver catapults, and they also focus on chariot warfare. And then you have the night goblins, who always live underground, and they're really big into working with other species to basically help them fight. In that they've got squigs, and they're the ones that catch the wyverns. Some of them have a relationship with spiders, so it's pretty rare. And they also specialize in oh man, I'm having a brain fart on that. But goblins are much more smaller than orcs. They're very diminutive, but they're much smarter, and they tend to fight much more cruelly. Like, you'll almost never meet an orc that willingly uses poison. Goblins are all about poison. Anything to give goblins an upper edge, they'll take. And goblins do not like to fight fair. They like to fight where they always have the upper hand, and they're much more cowardly because they're smaller, and it's much easier for someone to beat them up. So they rely on cheating. So you have like Night Goblins use a lot of poisons, they use squigs, they use nets. Night Goblin netters are a very, very popular strategy among Night Goblins, which they literally like throw barbed nets at you to just tie you up so you can't fight back. You know, Goblins tend to have a lot more ranged warfare, or they tend to rely on speed so that they can hit and run a bunch. And they also tend to focus a lot more on stealth. So those are the big differences. But generally, they're very, very different. They're just part of the same species is all. Chosen of Cain asks, what did the Chaos do? We already answered that. Cube asks, are there any greenskins that do not worship Gork and Mark? Also heard you liked it when people tell you to keep up the good work, so keep up the good work. Thanks, Cube. Yes. So the Forest Goblins worship the Spider God or the Feaster from Beyond, who they keep on the same level as Gork and Mark, or it depends on the tribe. Some of them worship the Feaster from Beyond ahead of them, but most it's even. The Night Goblins the Night Goblins worship the Bad Moon, which they consider to be an aspect of Gork and Mark. There are certain tribes that worship the Evil Sun, which is just the sun. And the Bad Moon is Morslip, by the way, the Warpstone Moon. The Evil Sun is sometimes worshipped by Savage Orcs, and then Common Goblins and Orcs, Common Orcs, which, especially the ones that live in like wastelands, like the Badlands. But it's usually considered an aspect or a part of Gork and Mark. And then those are the big ones. But you asked who do not worship Gork and Mark. Sorry. The ones that do not worship Gork and Mark are going to be Gnoblars and Hobgoblins. And that's not always the case. There are... Gork and Mark is worshipped by all typical greenskins. Gnoblars might worship Gork and Mark, but I don't think they do. Even though they are technically greenskins. It seems that they do anything they can to be on the ogre's good side, and that includes worshiping the Great Maw. The Great Maw, sorry. You only say duh if it's orc for a greenskin. And then Hobgoblins, I believe that the actual Hobgoblins that live up on the eastern steppes, they are all about Gork and Mark. But the ones that you would actually see in game, which are the ones that hang out with the Chaos Dwarves, they might worship Gork and Mark, but I'm pretty sure the Chaos Dwarves browbeat them into worshipping Hashut. Next up is Mydros, who says, hi, thanks for your amazing work. These are my questions. What have the Hobgoblins done to incur enmity from all the other greenskins? How does waaagh magic and energy work? And can greenskins use any of the winds of magic? Are the greenskins in the new world? And yes, how did they get there? All right, we've already answered all these, but just quick, just like super fast highlights. Hobgoblins are hated by all other greenskins because they backstabbed them during the Black Orc Rebellion in Zar Nagrund. And they have like a deep-seated nature of backstabbing, and over thousands of years, all other greenskins have gotten totally fucking sick of it. And it's like known when they're born that hobgoblins are backstabbing bastards. Two, waaagh magic and energy. We did a really big touch on that like 1 or 2 videos ago, so you can go check that out. And we already answered the other one in this video. In our greenskins in the New World, we talked about that. Yes, there are tons. Most of them are Savage Orcs or Forest Goblins. Boom. Cat59 asks, what would happen if goblins were able to discover and make use of gunpowder and the weapons that use it? If greenskins actively, or goblins at least, figured out how to actively use black powder, it would literally be the end of the planet, I'm pretty sure. One of the only limiting factors to the greenskin race from dominating the planet is that they are not gifted with technology. The greenskins that learned, as an example, the greenskins that learned ironworking from the Chaos Dwarves caused a huge uptick in the dangerousness of greenskins. Like, just from greenskins learning to use really, really basic smithing and create, like, iron weapons and armor, they started an invasion that was only stopped by Sigmar Heldenhammer and King Kurgan Ironbeard, and Sigmar was basically a god in mortal flesh. You know, he was always a man, but he was always kind of more than a man. And he barely stopped that invasion. And that invasion only happened because the greenskins figured out how to use iron, and it nearly wiped out all non-greenskins in the old world. So if they figured out how to use gunpowder, it would be really bad. If you want a good example of that, you can go read Orc Slayer, which is a Gotrek and Felix book, which actually has greenskins in it that, due to some shenanigans, can use black powder, and they're basically unbeatable. Like, even Gotrek and Felix are moderately powerless against them. And that just goes to show how scary they are. Cat59 asks, what is the greenskin afterlife like if they have one? Who was the oldest and consequently strongest or most cunning greenskin? So the greenskin afterlife is called the Great Green, and it's basically just a green tinted world that's just in eternal conflict. So basically it's a glorious sprawling battle where every orc and goblin are laughing it up while tearing through each other for all of eternity. And to greenskins, it's basically a giant party where everyone thinks punching each other in the face is the best joke that's ever been told, and it's insane. And then who is the oldest, strongest, or most cunning greenskin? When it comes to the oldest greenskins alive, it's well, if Grom the Paunch is still alive, which he may well be, it could be Grom. It might be Grimgor, depending on certain factors, but it's very hard to tell how old certain characters are. It could be Shamans. Waagh might be fairly old. Warzag's probably not the oldest, but he's certainly not super young. Duffskull, the Shaman, the Night Goblin Shaman who serves Skarsnik, he is very old. If I had to take a shot in the dark, it's either Grom the Paunch or Grimgor Ironhide. Is probably the oldest. When it comes to the strongest greenskin, that's easily Grimgor. When it comes to raw strength, Grimgor hands down, not even a question. The most cunning greenskin, the smartest greenskin is Skarsnik. Skarsnik is freakishly intelligent for a greenskin. And that's why Waagh wanted to get the two of them together. Waagh wanted Grimgor for his strength and Skarsnik for his smarts, and he knew he'd be able to take over the world if he did that. And it will always bug me that Games Workshop didn't give us a scene of those two meeting. Alright, next up is GRU Ski, the Dog Ski, who asked, this is two questions, okay. Regarding orc magical weapons and their rituals of enchantment, how do orcs make or gain magical armor / weaponry, and in doing so, how do they enhance them? So, most of the time, if greenskins are going to create or enhance an item, they will do it through ritual magic. There's a really powerful scene in the Skarsnik book, which very specifically shows how this happens, where they create Skarsnik's Prada, and it's a very intense ritual. It depends on the item, but if like you play through Total War Warhammer, there are some quest battles, especially in Azhag's campaign, where I think it's Azhag's armor. They talk about how he gets it. Like they create a quest story behind it, and that's pretty accurate to how you would actually get made. It's basically the shamans have like a vision where Gork and Mark kind of lead them along a path on how to enhance something, and they just follow it. And usually it can get pretty wild with what has to be achieved. But the way magic works in the Warhammer world, magic is also very naturally drawn to certain items or places based on things that have happened there. So if you have an orc who has a choppa and he just kills like thousands and thousands of people and does a ton of prayer or does particularly strange things with that weapon, it can begin to pick up magical properties due to the sheer amount of violence it has unleashed over its life. Or, you know, they might do some really impressive thing that actually gets the attention of Gork and Mark. Like maybe an orc war boss defeats like some big giant, and in the end he like smears the blood all over his armor, and that could actually end up powering up his armor. Stuff like that. But most of the time, greenskins get their magic items by just stealing it from other races. Like a pretty hysterical amount of greenskin weapons and armor are stolen from like vampires, dwarves, humans, lizardmen, tomb kings, like you name it. The orcs have probably stolen something from them and made it into their own, either by killing a champion and just looting his stuff or whatever. Alright, Chosen of Cain asks, who's the best, Gork or Mark? Well, I mean, that's That's a pretty interesting question. I'd have to say that personally, I'm more of a Gork man, but obviously Mork is my favorite. And then next up is Guardian of Metal. Is it Gork and Mark or is it Mork and Gork? You guys, I mean, these are pretty obvious questions, guys. It's very clearly Gork and Mork, or it might be Mork and Gork. Whatever, it doesn't matter. All right, next up is the Great Scholar, who asks, wanted to submit a few questions. My first question is, can Greenskins use a corrupted form of rune magic? I remember reading in Skarsnik's story that his Prada was a rune staff that was enchanted. Other orcs use weapons with sigils and carvings on them that have magical properties. Is this the same as rune magic or something completely different? Okay, so rune magic at its core is just regular magic that's been forced into a super specific shape and form so that it can only perform its desired function with 0 chance of failure. Should a wizard be determined and powerful enough, anyone can corrupt runic items, but doing so is really dangerous and very difficult to achieve because of how basically flawless they're designed, and because they're basically, you can almost think of them as like a bomb. Like it's basically an item that has like a massive amount of power just crammed into it. If you try and mess with that and you don't know what you're doing very well, or you lose control of it, all that magic can just explode out of control and you're just gonna get vaporized. So that is how, yeah, so Skarsnik's Prada, you can think of it as corrupted rune magic, but what he's using isn't actually rune magic. What happened was that Duffskull, what he did to the Prodder, or the rune staff, was he basically altered its function so that instead of containing magic that allows the rune lord to unleash rune spells, essentially, he changed its function to basically turn it into a battery. So it's basically this big stick that just drinks up magic when there's a lot of greenskins gathered around, so it just absorbs waaagh energy, and then when Skarsnik points it and does what he needs to do, it just shoots all of it out in this really violent beam that just comes out like a big bolt of lightning that just vaporizes anything it hits. So it's a very simple design, essentially. It's literally just something that stores power until Skarsnik points it and releases that power, and then it just shoots it in a vaguely straight line. So he's not using rune magic. He basically, the rune functions of the staff were so perverted they basically don't work anymore. It just stores energy that can be very violently unleashed. As for when it comes to other orc items, Greenskin Shamans are super capable of creating their own magic items. They require a pretty significant amount of power and ritual to complete, but Greenskins, a lot of the time, they will use their own personal sigils, because Greenskins don't really have a written language, but they will carve sigils into an item with dung or blood, or carve it in, you know, with a piece of metal or whatever, to give it properties based on their own beliefs, which with their magic to empower it, can cause that item to get something vaguely close to what they're trying to accomplish. So it's not that it's rune magic. So rune magic can be kind of a misleading word, because it may lead people to think that every item that has runes on it is runic magic, and that's not the case. Dwarven runes are a very specific subset of magic that's very unique and to its own thing. Hopefully that answers that. The Great Scholar asks, have Gork and Mark ever fought any of the other gods within the realms of chaos, such as Khorne or Sigmar? I know the idea of 2 orc gods is that they are supposed to eternally battle with one another, but that would have to get old eventually. So, according to the records that exist, the twin gods have never crossed paths with any other deities. They seem to be totally wrapped up in the Great Green, always fighting each other. And they are literally fighting 99.9 to the infinite % of the time. Like, the only time I know of where they stopped fighting was in the Skarsnik novel, when Skarsnik is creating his Prada. He basically has a hallucinogenic experience that allows him to visit the Great Green, and he actually gets to talk to Gork and Mark, and they actually stop fighting to speak to him for literally a few seconds, and they don't even get through what they wanted to tell him before they start just punching the shit out of each other. So, yeah, you would think it would get boring, but apparently not. And then our last question, also from the Great Scholar, is, do the Hobgoblins... Okay, so he basically asked, do any of the non-normal Greenskins worship Gork and Mark? And the rest of this we pretty much already answered. But the only Greenskin that people typically don't think about that definitely worship Gork and Mark, if they have the ability to, are Snotlings. Because Snotlings hang out with regular Greenskins. Now, whether Snotlings can worship Gork and Mark is a little less clear because they're really stupid. They are hilariously stupid. Snotlings almost seem to work purely based on innate, function as opposed to actual thinking. So I don't know if they have the capacity to worship Gork and Mark, but if they did, they would. And then we already answered the rest of that. And perfect. So that's going to be time for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you back here tomorrow at a similar time for our next wave of questions. Have a great day, guys. Bye.